Hello and welcome. This is Lisa Jones, and you are listening to the Exploring Death podcast. On today's podcast, I have Jeff O'Driscoll. Jeff has practiced emergency medicine for 25 years. For 8 years, he served as chairman of emergency medicine at a level 1 trauma center and teaching hospital. He has an academic appointment at the University of Utah School of Medicine and is a fellow of the American College of Emergency Physicians. A little over 20 years ago, Dr. O'Driscoll met an unconscious Jeff Olsen in the emergency department following the devastating car accident that killed Olsen's wife, Tamara. While Olsen experienced a profound out-of-body and near-death experience, which, by the way, was covered in my interview with Jeff Olsen on my last week's podcast, Dr. O'Driscoll had an amazing shared death experience with Tamara. Jeff and Jeff later shared their experiences with one another and have been dear friends ever since. 2 weeks ago, they shared their experiences side by side on stage at the International Association for Near-Death Studies conference, which was a profoundly unique way to hear both of their experiences as they unfolded simultaneously. I had the honor and privilege to be there to witness this extraordinary event. Last year, Dr. O'Driscoll wrote about his many shared death experiences and other spiritual encounters in his award-winning book, Not Yet. Welcome, Jeff.
Well, it's good to be here. Thank you for having me, Lisa.
Oh, I'm thrilled to have you. I was just talking about in the introduction about your amazing conversation. I'll call it a conversation. You were both on stage, but it felt very much like a conversation as you both shared that moment in time when Jeff was brought into the emergency room and you had this shared death experience with his wife, Tamara. And what I love especially about it is that's what I experienced when my husband died, was a shared death experience. And I like the fact that you and I both didn't have to go through the trauma of nearly losing our lives to be able to have these extraordinary experiences, which as a former accountant, I still sometimes find hard to believe that there's this veil that we can see through. But I love that you're an ER doc and that you've had these experiences too. So do you want to talk a little bit about that day and what happened?
I've had a lot of those experiences where we see through the veil. On that occasion, Jeff Olsen was involved in a horrific car crash, which he told you about on a previous interview, I understand. And his wife and his 14-month-old son, Griffin, were killed in the accident. And Jeff was transported to Salt Lake. And although his wife died at the scene, when I went in to see him in the trauma room, she was standing above him in the air, looking down and observing what was going on. And she communicated her profound gratitude to me for all the care that was being provided in our trauma center. It was one of those experiences where you see more than you normally see. You experience more than you normally would experience or feel, and it's one of those mind-opening experiences where you have a sudden and profound inflow of knowledge. And for example, I understood that Jeff would live despite his horrible injuries. I understood that he'd lose his leg. And not only did I understand that he would live, but I understood that he should live, that there was things yet to happen in the future. And I had all that experience in a moment. While Jeff was unconscious, having his own out-of-body and near-death experience, we wouldn't speak about it for a month. He had to do some healing before we could even talk about it.
That's just amazing. And so when you got together, how did it unfold? I mean, who took the first step, shall we say, in discussing this? Because for some people, these near-death experiences are something that they either don't want to talk about or they think they're crazy or, so what was that experience for you?
I had a friend who was an ER nurse in the department, and we had some spiritual experiences previously. We talked about them, and so we kind of had a like mind on the matter. And I was not in the trauma room when Jeff arrived. I was elsewhere in the department. There was another ER physician, trauma surgeon, and others taking care of Jeff when he arrived. And this other nurse came and got me and grabbed me by the arm and said, "You have to come to the trauma room. She's there." And I said, who's there? And she said, his wife. And we'd had radio contact with the transport team. We knew who was coming, what his injuries were, and that his wife was deceased at the scene. And when she was insistent that I come to the trauma room, I finally realized what she was talking about, because she'd already been there and already seen Tamara. So I wasn't the only one. And I didn't ever expect to see Jeff again when he left to go to the OR from the trauma room. I finished my shift and went home and never expected to see him again. And then about a month later, this same nurse came and tugged on my arm again and said, we have to go see Jeff. We have to tell him what happened. I was quite reluctant. I said, no, we don't have to. I don't have to, at least. If you want to go, you go. But I'm just fine not going. And she was insistent, and she drugged me up to his hospital room, and she started sharing initially. And then I chimed in and acknowledged what she was saying, that I'd had the experience as well.
Wow, that is amazing. So I almost feel like this nurse that was there was kind of the angel that brought the two of you together. You know, sometimes we need those earth angels to keep us moving forward on our path.
She was very much that. She told me about some of her experiences, and they were so profound they made me weep when I heard her talk about them. And it was only her persistence that kept Jeff and I connected. After that first visit, we'd shared enough that I had a profound feeling that we would be friends and that there was purpose in our future. And so he and I kept in close touch for the following year. In fact, that first year of our friendship is much of what's talked about in my book, Not Yet, because we shared a lot of spiritual experiences together and gradually came to know and trust one another. And it's only a year ago that I wrote my experiences, and only in the last year have Jeff and I appeared together a few times to share them. And the response we've received from people has been wonderful and positive, and makes me feel like I finally made the right decision to share.
Wow, that's
It's
beautiful.
so critical, you know?
Right. I know the feeling. It's I mean, I feel like you and I have had conversations, and you're very sure of yourself, which I love, because I've been very unsure of myself, and just knowing how sure you are, I think helps everyone. Especially, I can speak for myself. It helps me really own what I saw and what I experienced. And I feel like there's a bigger purpose for these stories to be shared, to help other people that have experienced similar things and yet don't believe it, or feel maybe they don't even have the support that we've had. So
I hope it facilitates a conversation. I hope it validates and galvanizes people's spiritual experiences so that they feel more comfortable about it. My own daughter, who's a newborn ICU nurse, wrote me a letter after reading my book and said that she now realized she'd had a number of spiritual experiences that she didn't realize were spiritual until she read my book. And I was just talking with a woman a few days ago who told me that her daughter read my book and told her that one of the things she liked was that it was written in such a way as to make her feel comfortable with her own spiritual experiences and not like they were things that couldn't be discussed.
yes, I think that to me was probably the biggest takeaway I had from attending the conference, the International Association of Near-Death Studies conference, that's where you and I met. By having so many people having like minds and also sharing their experiences, it's validating to one another, but it also, I felt like it opened that conversation to share with others. Since I've been back to Maui and talked about where I was, people say, oh, well, I've had an experience. I mean, everyone, I've got chills as I say that, because to me, when I get chills, it's like truth coming through.
That's almost universally the response I get when I share my experiences. People will come and they'll say, you know, I had an experience, and they'll start to talk about it. And often they'll preface what they say with a statement such as, you know, I've never spoken about this before. And I'm glad people feel comfortable. Many people came to Jeff and I after our presentation and told us how much they liked it, how much they enjoyed it, and what an unusual format it was. And I said something at the time that wasn't really planned, but I think it well describes what happened. I said, you know, Jeff and I have been having conversations for 20 years about this. We just had this conversation in front of a group.
That's right. Absolutely. And that's what it felt like. It felt like a conversation. And yet the fact that you two were standing side by side and then sharing each moment of of Jeff's, he was in the accident. So he was kind of talking about that. And then you were talking about, like you said, you heard the radio and who was coming in, and it was that duality of the timeline that overlapped each other that really, I felt like it just gave such an opening for us to imagine that veil that was opened for the two of you in that moment. And I do think it's so profound. I've never experienced or witnessed anybody else that's had that kind of dual timeline. So it was amazing. And I hope you both continue to share in that way in the future.
We're hoping to. We have an upcoming engagement together, and we're looking for more opportunities to share together, because you've talked with a number of people and you have your own experience that you feel compelled to help people interpret their own experiences, to feel comfortable with their own experiences, and to find their path forward in life, and have confidence in another existence that goes beyond this existence.
Absolutely. So let's just take a step back. I would love to know, what was your first experience? And it's probably in your book, but maybe give a little highlight for, what was kind of the first thing that you realized you had this ability to, see through the veil, so to speak?
I'm not sure that it's in my book, and I'm not actually sure what the answer is, because it never occurred to me to go back and think about when my first experience was until after the book, when people started asking me. And I've thought a lot about it since. I guess it's been going on so long that I didn't really, think about it as one initiating thing. But I think part of it might have happened when my older brother was killed in the farm accident when I was 11 years old. I distinctly remember getting answers to questions I had, and for me, it often comes as a voice. Sometimes that voice that speaks to your heart, that you just know the source, and you have a witness of its truthfulness as you experience it. And I say experience more than hear, because it's not something you hear as much as you experience. And I know that I got those answers when I was still a teenager, because I distinctly remember on one occasion writing a couple of pages of response to one of my questions. And when I was still a teenager, I was 19 at the time, I remember encountering this woman who was a few years older than me, whom I trusted and respected because of her experience. And without giving her any context whatsoever, I don't know what prompted me to do this, but I asked her one day, I said, "Does God ever speak to you in sentences?" And she just looked at me with this knowing kind of firm expression, and she wagged her finger at me and she said, "Don't ever doubt that." And that's all she said. She didn't ask for any explanation. She knew, and she gave me good advice, and I've tried to follow that advice ever since. I'm not sure when I first saw things that other people don't see, but I think it was when I was still in my late teens or early 20s.
Wow, that's amazing. And I love that you got that advice, what was it? Don't
ever doubt that.
Don't ever doubt that. That's amazing, because I feel like our society in general is all about not only doubt that, but it's not true. It's, it's evil. It's
In fact, a lot of people come to me, like we talked about a few moments ago, and they'll say, I had an experience. And they're almost always quick to point out what they didn't experience. And they'll start off by saying, "I didn't actually see somebody, but I just knew they were there." And they say it as though knowing was somehow a consolation prize for not being able to see. Or they'll say, "I didn't hear it. I just understood that this is what they wanted me to do." As if hearing were somehow more important than understanding. But knowing and understanding are the senses of the spirit. And if you look at people's lives carefully, they're much more powerful forces in people's lives than what they see and what they hear with their physical eyes and ears. People need to trust their feelings, and they need to believe what they know. Those are spiritual senses.
I love that. And it's so true, because, and even I feel that way, as much as connection as I have and seem to be able to tap in. It's about that knowing, like you said. For me, when I hear sentences, it's not really like, it's just a knowing sentence. It like just drops, right? It just lands.
Yeah, so much more than can be contained in sentences often.
Right. Absolutely.
You might get a sentence or two in what we recognize as verbal communication, but with it often comes volumes of understanding and insight all in a moment. You have this flash of knowledge that's placed upon you and given you an opportunity to partake of it.
Absolutely. The most profound one I had along those lines was I was in visiting my mom in Kauai. She was there on a 30-day visit, and I was leaving. She had maybe 2 weeks left. And as I left her condominium, it was almost like I walked through a doorway. And as I walked through this moment in time, that knowledge just landed within me that said, something's going to happen to your mother and you're going to be back here very shortly. And I didn't even know what to make of that. And this was 4 or 5 years ago, in 2014. And it was overwhelming. It was so just profound. And yet I didn't want to deal with it. Like I didn't want to hear that. I wanted to unhear that or unknow that. But, and then sure enough, it was 2 weeks, almost the day later, that I received a phone call, and she had had a stroke, and I flew out, and she ultimately died. And there was a whole nother, so much more that happened in that experience, but that knowing, and sometimes I think you get messages too, and sometimes you don't want to deal with it. You don't want to accept what you've heard. So what do you do with that?
Yeah, sometimes I'm told to do things and I don't want to do them, and I'll have an argument with the voice. Say, no, I don't want to do that, and say, no, you have to do that. And no, in fact, on one time I was sent on an errand I didn't even know why. I was just sent to another city to be at this event that was taking place, and I didn't understand why. And in fact, tickets would be very difficult to obtain. And after I had this impression that I should go to this city, I called my friend the next day about something completely unrelated, and she didn't even ask me anything about it. She just, all of a sudden, she goes, I have your tickets for you. I said, what tickets? And she goes, the tickets. And it was to this event. She said, they're for you. I know they're for you. And so I marched off 200 miles to this other city to be at this event. And it's too long to go into here. It's in my book. But I was told while I was there that I needed to give a message to this couple, this man and wife and their 2 kids that I met in the parking lot waiting to go into the event. And it's during the event when I get the message, and I go, no, I just met these people. I don't need, and they, no, you have to. And I said, no, I don't want to. And the voice came a third time and said, if you don't tell them, you will be held accountable, because this is why I brought you here. And so after it was over, everything fell into place. It lined up perfectly. It was perfect for me to walk over and share my message with them, and they received it immediately. In fact, all I said to the man was, it's time. And he looked at me, and his tears started to stream down his face and his wife's, and he said, I know. And it was a profound experience, but I didn't want to do it because it was very uncomfortable.
Wow, that's powerful. And it just shows that, once again, I mean, especially that, you will be held accountable if you don't do this. I mean, talk about
Yeah, it was very unsettling.
Yeah, very unsettling. And then you're like, what am I mean, that was kind of like this message about my mom. I'm like, no, I don't want to hear this. I don't want to know that something's going to happen. But yet in some way it did prepare me. It really, I think, maybe, I don't know why I was given the message, but maybe it helped me to just subtly prepare before it all unfolded.
And even if not to prepare before it unfolded, to be accepting after it happened, because you'd been told 2 weeks in advance. It wasn't
Yes.
like it was something unplanned or accidental. It was something that was in the grand scheme of events, and you'd been given a 2-week heads up so you could know when it came to pass that it was the right thing.
I love that. That's a great perspective, and thank you. That gives me a new way to look at it, because that's been my question all these years, is like, why was I given that? But I think you're absolutely right. Just so I knew after the fact that this was just, here's the deck of cards that you've been dealt, and, just giving you a little,
My wife
warning.
just had an experience like that this last week, where she had an impression about me 2 weeks ago, and it came about recently, and she didn't tell me until after the fact about her impression, but it was reassuring.
Wow, that's amazing. Well, is there any other event or anything that comes to mind that you feel would be important for the listeners to hear today? Or I'd love.
a lot of people come to me and they ask me, how can I get my own spiritual experiences? Which was kind of, in a lot of ways, the premise of my book is you don't have to die to have your own, what I call near life experience. Because most people would like to have these experiences. They just would rather not die to get them. And people ask me about how to how to have their spiritual experiences. And I tell them often, one key that's worked for me and it's worked for other people when I've shared it with them. If you want a spiritual experience, when you pray or meditate or ponder or whatever you do to get connected with God or the universe or source, whatever you call it, ask this one question: what can I do to serve somebody else today? And if you'll ask that question, I promise you, you'll have a spiritual experience. It may be a small nudge or a prompting or a feeling or goosebumps on your arm or something. And if you're willing to act on the answer you get and go and serve somebody else, the next day you ask that question, you'll get a little bit bigger experience and you'll grow into it until you have your own spiritual connection, till you have your own center that you can go to when you need answers.
Wow, I love that. And it's so practical and so easy. I mean, that's pretty easy. But again, you got to remember that once you're given the prompting, then you got to do it.
You got to do it. And one of the things I think you and I talked about once before was we give lip service all the time and pay and honor the notion that you have to practice to be good at something. If you want to play the piano, you have to practice. If you want to be good at sports, you need to practice. But we tend to not think that we need to practice at spiritual things. And this is one good example of a way you can practice to become more spiritually in tune and more spiritually led in your life.
I love that. And that's so true too. People always ask me, well, how do you learn to channel? How do you learn to communicate with spirit? And it's very similar to what you're suggesting. And I love yours is action here on earth. And I love that. And mine is the same thing, like we talked about, like some people can just do it out of the gate. It's just very natural. It's not like they have to turn it on or not, but if you follow some, guidelines, you can start practicing how to bring messages through and do that automatic handwriting. And I talk about that in my book, The Art of Living Happy After the Loss of a Loved One, in these steps that are pretty straightforward. And the more you practice, the more it unfolds. And to me, I feel like I live a miraculous life every single day. I mean, things happen all the time, and it just gets better and better the more I practice my spirituality. So do you feel the same way?
I do. And I found sometimes people are really reluctant to ask questions sometimes. In a spiritual moment, I guess sometimes you're just so overwhelmed and so enthralled and so it's such an exciting and wonderful experience that you don't want to do anything to disrupt it, like ask a dumb question. But sometimes questions are helpful. And I grew up in a Christian home, and I still love reading the New Testament, although I respect all religious traditions, and I've read widely. But I love what happened to Paul on the road to Damascus. When he had his spiritual experience, he had this profound experience. And his first question was, who are you? And his second one was, what would you have me do?
Right.
And a lot of times, if you're having one of these vague spiritual feelings, and people get it in different ways, but sometimes when you're having one of these feelings, it's helpful to ponder those two questions. Who are you? And sometimes you'll get an answer. And sometimes that answer will put everything into context, and you'll kind of go, oh, okay, I get it. I understand the message now, and I understand why you're bringing it to me. And asking that, most of the time when they come, they want something. They want you to do something. Sometimes they're there to help you, and sometimes they're there to ask you for help. And when you ask, what would you have me do? Sometimes you get a profound additional message that otherwise wouldn't come if you didn't ask, I think.
That's great. I love that. Well, why don't we ask? I do readings at each of my interviews. And so if you're open for it, I'll pull a few cards and see what universe, God, or source energy, or whatever we want to call it, has to say.
Yes, that's fine. I welcome that. I've never had a reading, so I'm not sure what'll happen here, but I'm open.
I love it. I love it. Okay. So the first card is always the blockage card. And so what I'm getting, and I feel like this is kind of an overall message for what you're suggesting, and it's
Yeah.
surrender. And so
Yeah.
I think for so many people, like, they don't want to surrender. They're like, oh, I've got to control everything. It's, like, whatever comes through, I need to know what the answer is. And I think, it's all about surrender, right? It's all about just trusting that there is this bigger whatever out there, whatever you want to call it, but that there is this beautiful divine, love that truly cares about us. And that if you just open and surrender, that's like the first step. What do you think?
I agree wholeheartedly. If you're really set in what you think and what you want to do, sometimes it makes it really hard to get any direction.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, so then, oh my gosh, I just love these cards so much. So the second card is commitment, which is what we were just talking about practicing and about being committed to, if you really want to tap in and get the guidance and advice and support of this amazing energy that's out there, you have to commit to doing it and not just kind of just sit back and think it's just gonna, you're gonna be struck by lightning or something, or you might get struck by lightning and then you'll have an out-of-body experience, which
Yes,
you
of
may
course.
not want to have, right?
This is correct. But many people function under the misperception that spiritual activities are passive. And they can be, often they are, but you can be active and participate and commit to it, enriching the experience.
I absolutely love that. And then the outcome card is freedom,
Yes.
right?
I like that.
So, right. I mean, again, I just love the confirmation that these cards give us, because the freedom, that's what I experience. I experience freedom on a daily basis because I'm so tapped in. I'm so just connected. And not to say I get every message that comes my way by any means. I feel like all of us are getting messages on a daily basis. And again, if you're controlling, if you're closed off, if you want to push it away, you're not going to get them for sure. But the more that you surrender and you what's the word, have that commitment to receive, and then you get that freedom and things open up. I mean, experiences, meeting amazing people, like meeting you at this event. I just feel like what a gift. And I feel like the first 2 days at that conference, I'm like, why am I here? Why am I here? And then suddenly it just, the floodgates opened, and I just connected with all the speakers that were there. And I feel my whole life was just elevated while, when I connected in with all these perfect people that had these amazing experiences that I can now share with my listeners.
I left that conference with a full heart because I felt like I'd encountered a couple of new friends, real people that I would be able to stay in contact with and have a meaningful friendship with into the future. So I was very happy with that conference.
Yes, me too. Well, is there anything else you want to share? And, and again, your book is called?
It's called Not Yet.
Not Yet, of course.
I don't have a copy of it in front of me to hold up. And
we'll put a link on the website there for you.
It's on Amazon. It's on my own website, jeffodriscoll.com, with some of my paintings and bronze sculptures that I have available to people, and a little bit about me. And I'm looking forward to keeping in touch with you and making my trek to Maui.
Absolutely. You've already been invited, and I can't wait for you to come out and experience the magic. You've been here to Maui before, yes?
Oh, I've been probably 10 times, I suspect, on Maui.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
Fabulous. Well, that's great. And also, I did want to mention your art. I mean, your art is amazing. I've been to your website, and I'm so impressed. I feel like that's another way that this universe, this energy comes through you, right? You're able to express it that way.
Well, I was sculpting this bronze. It's a bronze of Michael the Archangel lifting a fallen soldier from the flames of war. And I can't take credit for conceiving the idea because it was done by a guy named Walker Hancock. He was literally one of the monuments men associated with World War II.
Wow.
And he was a sculptor, and he was from Pennsylvania. And he sculpted this to commemorate the 1,400 Pennsylvania railroad workers that died in World War II. And it's just a gorgeous 39-foot piece in the 30th Street Station in Philadelphia. Mine's a 1/12 scale. Mine's 39 inches tall. But I was working on the wings one day, and I was struggling with the wings. I'd worked on them for a week trying to get them just right. And I had this really liberating experience one day when I realized, I know just about as much about what angels' wings look like as anybody else on the earth, so I can do it however I want, So I love to sculpt. It's so invigorating, and if you don't like it, you just change it until it's the way you want it. It's such a contrast to practicing medicine, where you're expected to get things right, get them the first time, and never make a mistake.
That's right. Fantastic. And I saw that sculpture, and it's breathtaking. So you've inspired me to really work more on my art, because that's one part of my life that my brother was the artistic one, so.
I never did art of any kind until about 5 to 10 years ago. I never thought I had any artistic inclinations at all. And I think some of my spiritual experiences awakened a little bit of an artistic endeavor on my part.
Fantastic. Well, good. I'm glad to hear that, because maybe I've got hope still too for that.
and my children's books, by the way, are on my website as well.
Oh, great.
Yeah, I had a great time doing a series of 6 children's books last year that turned out really well.
Wow. You're just a Renaissance man. What can I say, Jeff? You do it all: medicine, art, spirituality.
It's a good life.
That's right. Well, fantastic. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with me here on Exploring Death. And I just know that our listeners are going to gain so much from your experiences, and be sure to, look up Jeff's book. Again, we have the links on the website. And if you have any questions, you can always reach me at LisaExploringDeath@gmail.com. I'm kind of in the transition here.
Yeah, say that once more.
Yeah, LisaExploringDeath@gmail.com.
There you go.
Okay, good. Thank you. All right. Well, until I see you on Maui, Jeff, take care.
All righty. It's been great chatting with you.
Okay. Thank you so much for listening to Exploring Death today. And until next time, aloha.
Thank you for listening to the Exploring Death podcast. This podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Before you make any financial or legal decisions, consult a professional. This show is copyrighted by Exploring Death. Written permission must be granted before syndication or rebroadcasting.